As devastating as the October 7th Hamas attack was in terms of the death toll and terroristic trauma inflicted on the Israeli people, what the world has seen since is a veritable torrent of destruction now being unleashed on Gaza and the other Palestinian-occupied territories with no end in sight. From the very beginning of this latest saga, people across the world have been struggling to understand not only how a roughshod group of subjugated terrorists was able to breach Israel's high-tech security apparatus and do so much damage, but also why they would even wage such a wanton level of barbarity, given that they must have known Israel's most basic impulse would have been to unleash the Kraken in a direct response. Analysts have tried to explain it away, referring to the years of occupation, degradation, and pent-up rage and frustration, which they believe fueled a 2-year planning process in which Hamas was somehow able to train, recruit, and assemble hardware completely undetected using underground tunnels and external proxies. In this brief presentation, I'm going to present to you the facts and evidence as I see them, and use basic functions of logical deduction to prove that the most likely source of Hamas's master plan to kill, rape, and abduct as many Israeli citizens as possible originated not from within the borders of Gaza, Iran, or the confines of some Hezbollah training camp in the outskirts of Lebanon, but from the Western secret society, commonly referred to as the Illuminati, that has its Hydra tentacles infused within all elements of Western government, including Israel's. Shockingly, I believe in a very tangible sense that the Hamas attack runs equivalent to Hitler's Reichstag fire and constitutes a false flag event, where deeply embedded elements of the West coordinated with certain double-minded Hamas agents in leadership positions to create the pretext for what we see now in terms of the unrestrained military action being waged on the subjugated Palestinian population that could potentially explode into an all-out war with Iran and even world war. So to begin, I'd like to draw your attention to the propaganda machine that has been in full force since 10/7, October 7th, the Hamas attack, otherwise known as Israel's 9/11. The Western world speaks with a monolithic voice emanating from what I call the hive mind or the demon hive. The American left and right, eternally at odds by design, may battle on social issues like the trans agenda, but on the big stuff like war, Israel, and the interests of the military-industrial complex, the West's establishment mouthpieces all sing and harmonize in the same key, which tells you right there the game is rigged. A couple of examples: the Queen of Jordan's Amanpour interview, where she called out the reckless slaughter of Palestinian civilians and the West's racist double standard, and UN Secretary General Guterres' comments about the Hamas attack not happening in a vacuum. In both cases, criticism of Israel invoked an immediate response across the entire Western world in the key of condemnation. Jew hater, anti-Semite, lack of moral clarity, how dare you even say their name in the face of what Israel has just experienced, how dare you savage, you must be fired. Within days of the attack, if not the very next day, the world was immediately introduced to 3 primary talking points coming directly from the White House, but more specifically from Antony Blinken and John Kirby. Number 1, Israel has a right to defend itself, meaning, in the wake of such a savage and merciless attack, Israel, and tacitly the United States, now reserves the explicit right and moral justification to engage in whatever military action deemed necessary to quote-unquote eliminate Hamas and ensure the survival of the state of Israel. So far, what that's involved has been the utter devastation of Gaza's infrastructure and the killing of at least 10,000 Palestinians, the vast majority of whom have been non-combatants. Other occupied territories, including the West Bank, are also under siege, and many illegal outposts on Palestinian land are being fast-tracked into legal status, which has been the stated aim of Netanyahu's extremist far-right administration virtually from the time he resumed his role as prime minister. So whereas before 10/7, when Israel was still bound to some level of civility in their approach to the occupation and further annexation of land within the loose confines of international law, Post 10/7, Israel's 9/11, all gloves and restraints have been removed under the umbrella of self-defense. Number 2, we cannot go back to the status quo, meaning while there may have been some tepid discussion about a two-state solution that both Israel and the West never took seriously, from this point forward, all two-state talk has effectively been crushed, and it will solely be up to Israel to decide how to move forward on anything related to the Palestinian people and their land. And number 3, we are being told on virtually a daily basis that what the world witnessed on 10/7, October 7th, aka Israel's 9/11, amounts to, quote, the worst atrocities this century has seen and the worst atrocities the Jews have suffered since the Holocaust. This simply means that nothing Israel and the United States have waged on the indigenous Palestinian population over the past 5 to 7 decades will ever trump the barbarity of the Hamas attack. And if you even breathe the words occupation or settlement colonialism or apartheid state, you are a morally defunct, subhuman Jew hater that must be shamed and or excommunicated. Now, it's not hard to see that all 3 of the Western Hive's major bullet points hinge completely on the vile, savage, and over-the-top nature of the 10/7 Hamas attack, otherwise known as Israel's 9/11. If the Hamas terrorists had just kidnapped a few hundred people and killed a bunch of soldiers or whatever, maybe even a rape or two, it would not have been enough to silence all criticism of the occupation, apartheid state, and illegal seizures of land, and claim the moral authority to essentially go full spectrum warfare on Gaza and beyond, openly committing what is absolutely resembling legitimate acts of genocide. America is even proceeding with a new so-called secret military base in Israel as we speak. This could not have happened before 10/7, which is why they even lied about the 40 beheaded babies, why the US president was even willing to lie about it. If the world was willing to believe it, they were willing to say it. Every increased degree of reported savagery and vileness has only strengthened their moral position, which has been the most telling aspect of this whole debacle. Logically, this makes sense. The only way what we're seeing now could have worked in this dynamic, where the Israelis are the oppressors and the Palestinians are the subjugated, was to have an attack so disturbingly reminiscent of the Jewish Holocaust that it would thrust the oppressors, in this case, back into victim status in the eyes of the world. This leads us to the attack, because I'm not saying it didn't happen. We all saw it happening practically in real time. From the word jump, it was being televised across social media and all the major media outlets. Unlike the wag the dog Ukraine war, which has virtually been hidden from us, a day has not gone by where we are not reminded of how sick, savage, and subhuman the Hamas attackers were on their evil day. Does that not strike you as interesting? From the very first UN presser held on October 8th, when Israel's UN ambassador Gilad Erdan announced that this was Israel's 9/11, this state representative was out there already guns blazing with the show and tell material. He had the big blown up snapshot of the grandma in her wheelchair holding the rifle and throwing up the peace sign, which was followed by the tablet he busted out to scroll through the kidnapping clips. And in addition to all the jarring still images of murder and mayhem and the interviews of Israeli survivors, soon after came the body cam footage, because evidently the animals somehow got it in their heads that recording themselves committing crimes against humanity would be beneficial to their cause. You'd think that'd be the last thing you'd want to do, but nope, the video version of Hamas Attack porn became readily consumable to the public. And then came the voicemail messages. That one terrorist calling his mom, "Hello, mama, I killed 10 Jews with my bare hands. 10, mama, 10. You what?" And then the video interviews of actual terrorists in Israeli custody. "Did you kill them?" "Yes, I killed them." "You know that was wrong, right?" "Yes." All this has been produced and coordinated by the Western media machine for the clear intent of monopolizing the moral high ground in order to justify everything we are seeing now on the troop mobilization front, the destruction of Gaza, the genocidal targeting of civilians, and the expansion of US military action in the region. But guys, they fucked up in showing us everything. In the deluge of Hamas porn, they fucked up. They made a mistake, and I will show you how. But before I do, allow me to fully articulate the point of everything I've just shared. Who has gained the most in the wake of the 10/7 Hamas attack, otherwise known as Israel's 9/11? What have the Palestinians or the Hamas terrorists gained in the wake of the 10/7 attack, Israel's 9/11? The answer is death and destruction. Gaza is on track to be completely wiped out. The West Bank is under siege. Settlers in illegal outposts are now armed to the teeth. Not a single positive thing has come from this attack on the Palestinian side. On the Israeli side, however, they have received huge inflows of cash and weaponry, huge inflows of American military support, huge inflows of moral support from the Western nations, and full license to essentially do whatever they want to the Palestinian people under the umbrella of moral superiority and self-defense. And they have unflinchingly chosen to embark on an unforgiving mass murder campaign that could very likely inflame the entire Middle East region. And to my Christian brothers and sisters here in the US who believe everything they're told on Fox News and CBN, this is a nation that has subjugated an entire group of people, has systematically pushed forward with illegal land seizures that can only be interpreted as theft. They have been caught lying many times over in their propaganda campaigns, and when it comes to murdering mass numbers of innocent civilians, women, children, and the elderly, there's absolutely no conscience because they openly state that they view these people as animals. So excluding Judaism and the Jewish people in general, and just focusing on this nation's leadership, their government, where does this all place Israel as a political entity on the spectrum of good and evil? Who is their daddy? Clearly, it is not the Most High. But getting back to how they fucked up, towards the end of the brief compilation of terrorist video interviews they released recently, there's a part the establishment bullhorns like Megyn Kelly will not show you, namely the short segment where one of the animal terrorists explicitly states that they were tricked. The interviewer asks, "Why all the killing? Why?" The terrorist responds with, "They tricked us. They tricked us. They fooled us." "Who fooled you?" the interviewer asks. "Those from Hamas," the terrorist said. "They sit in their homes and left us here. They left us inside," meaning inside of Israel. "That's what you think?" the interviewer asks. "Yes, that's what I think. Those in Qatar and Turkey. They speak in the name of Al-Aqsa and the Muslims, and they stay there while they sent us here," the terrorist says. "Who are those in Qatar?" the interviewer asks. "The leadership of Hamas," he says. The interviewer then asks who, the terrorist names 3 guys, and then the interviewer asks again, "So that's what you think? They tricked you?" And the terrorist says, "Yes, they tricked us. They're there while their families are being bombed in Gaza." And then another terrorist in a separate interview said, "The leadership abandoned us." Who are they? When you say Hamas, who do you mean?" the interviewer asks. "All of Hamas, the heads of Hamas," the terrorist says. The interview then asks for who specifically, and the terrorist gives up some names. The interviewer then asks, "And you say they are the ones who destroyed Gaza. How did they destroy Gaza?" "Yes," the terrorist says, "in everything. Do you see there's something left of Gaza? No. Gaza exists? No. Gaza was destroyed, and who destroyed it? They did with their own hands, and we, with our own hands, we destroyed Gaza," is what the terrorist said. Now let me ask you this. Why would the Hamas leadership put together an op that would, in the terrorists' own words, destroy Gaza? Why in the holy hell would they do that? Why would they abandon these clueless terrorists in the heat of the moment on a rudderless, directionless, pointless mission to basically just murder, rape, and kidnap, and that's it? Why would they do that? Why would they plan for 2 years only to abandon their foot soldiers in the midst of the mission? Does any of that make sense? And the answer to all these questions is not these folks are just subhuman, low IQ animal barbarians who don't know any better. Did you know that both Israel and the US were in the business of interfering with Palestinian elections with the purpose of repressing the more moderate PLO and all moderate candidates who had challenged Hamas in order to keep Hamas in power? Why, you ask? In order to keep the flavor of militant radicalism in motion is the answer, so they could maintain the pretext of full lockdown and total suppression. Nobody can understand how this attack even happened in the first place, given the sophisticated nature of Israel's border security. Nobody can understand why the terrorists even chose this path to begin with, given that it has only led to the destruction of the Palestinian people. If we use the simple formula of logical deduction, the most obvious answer to all these questions is that Israel itself, in conjunction with these foreign, non-Gaza based, traitorous Hamas leaders, put this plan in motion to create the pretext for what we're all seeing now. Israel has stood to gain the most post 10/7, while the Palestinians have lost everything. But just to really drive this all the way home, by smashing it out of the park, let's take a really quick trip down memory lane and look at some key elements and tidbits of info surrounding America's 9/11, the day America was attacked by Saudi Arabian terrorists. First off, on the morning of 9/11, former President George Bush Jr. just happened to be in a Florida classroom filled with members of the press with the cameras rolling, observing a very bizarre reading lesson involving some highly rehearsed kids reciting some very strange words considering the context, and reading from a story called My Pet Goat. When had a president ever done that before, and what could have possibly been the point? No president has done that since, and again, like why? Reading lesson? Who cares? Dude, you've got an hour? Fix the budget, bro. Clearly, this was some kind of staged event. But what made it even weirder and infinitely more evil, aside from the goat reference pointing directly to Satanism, was what the kids were chanting in this lesson just as the first plane was smashing into the tower. Some of you may remember where the woman was all, get ready, and the kids were all, plane, hit, steal, must. Like, are you serious? Is that not trippy as spooky on the level of witchcraft, to say the least? But there's so much more. Because not only did 3 towers collapse into their footprint, controlled demolition style, which had never happened before in the history of large building fires, and again, 3 towers, not 2, U.S. officials were able to immediately identify one of the main culprits, Hamas Attack, as in the very next day because his passport just happened to be located perfectly intact, sitting right there on top of the rubble. Okay, sure, why not? And just as there are many questions surrounding Israel's 10/7 intelligence breach, Americans had many questions too about the crazy explosions people were hearing both before and after the towers were hit, and why the rubble was cleared out in record time and sent to China, I believe, rather than somewhere local for forensic purposes. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because there are obviously many more questions. So again, we have to ask, what was the fruit of America's most devastating terror attack ever, and who had the most to gain? Did the terrorists get anything out of it? Well, according to some numbers put together by the Watson Institute over at Brown University, a whole lot of money ended up being spent on an assortment of activity all over the Middle East and beyond post 9/11, and guess who got the most? As in $2 trillion. Who do you think scored the most? Saudi Arabia? That's where the terrorists were from? Nope. Saddam Hussein in Iraq, because that's apparently where the US killed the most people post 9/11? Nope. It was the Department of Defense, the DOD, $2 trillion. Guess who got $1 trillion? You probably guessed it already. That's right, Homeland Security, $1 trillion. That's 1,000 billion. And then they spent $885 billion on bases and installations all over the world. Are you starting to catch my drift here? Did a single person in the Middle East benefit from America's 9/11, the greatest terror attack this country has ever seen? One person at all in the Middle East? Obviously, the answer is absolutely not, but there's more. How many people do you think were killed after 9/11 by weapons produced by America's military-industrial complex? The answer is a shit ton, like a mind-blowing amount. 1 million civilians alone in Iraq, and there were no Iraqi terrorists on any of the planes. And it turns out the plot thickens even more because George Bush was already talking about invading Iraq in January of 2001, 8 months before 9/11. Coincidence or not? Of course not. And in terms of a rough estimate on the overall death toll, both direct from combat and indirect, America's war on terrorism that is still in motion has killed somewhere in the realm of 5 to 7 million people and has displaced up to at least 60 million. Per the Watson Institute, quote, millions have fled airstrikes, bombings, artillery fire, drone attacks, gun battles, and rape. People have fled the destruction of their homes, neighborhoods, hospitals, schools, jobs, and local food and water sources. They have escaped forced evictions, death threats, and large-scale ethnic cleansing set off by the U.S. wars in Afghanistan and Iraq in particular. End quote. Does any of that sound familiar? Are we not deja vuing big time in what's happening right now in Gaza? So once again, post America's 9/11, the terrorists achieved a grand total of 0, while the American government came out on top somewhere in the realm of $8 trillion. But here is the kicker, guys. The piece of the puzzle that's going to cement this all together. Because I have to ask you one more time. Did the Hamas terrorists achieve anything at all that can even remotely be construed as good with their rudderless 10/7 attack, otherwise known as Israel's 9/11, where Hamas's leadership even decided to jump ship midway through the mission? Can you say hell to the fucking no? Because the answer is hell to the fucking no. And again, Israel, on the other hand, post 10/7, October 7th, Israel's 9/11, mo money, mo weapons and gear, mo support, mo land, mo everything. Ding, 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 ding. Now check this out.
His first Treasury Secretary. Paul O'Neill reported in his own memoir that George W. Bush was talking about invading Iraq at the very first cabinet meeting in late January, early February of 2001. Something to do with the old man, one-upmanship with the father, George Herbert, right? Very strange. And when it came to Afghanistan, we didn't exactly rush. We gave Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and the rest of those murderers a nearly 1 month head start. Yeah, the bombs did not start falling on Afghanistan until October 7th. Yeah, the bombs did not start falling on Afghanistan until October 7th. Yeah, the bombs did not start falling on Afghanistan until October 7th.
Yeah, the bombs did not start falling on Afghanistan until October 7th. Yeah, the bombs did not start falling on Afghanistan until October 7th. Yeah, the bombs did not start falling on Afghanistan until October 7th. Yeah, the bombs did not start falling on Afghanistan until October 7th.